Born in Switzerland to Dutch parents, Guido Zemschrev was brought up in Belgium and France. By the age of 18, he was fluent in Dutch, French, German, and English. These language skills were to prove invaluable 6 years later, when he found himself running one of the biggest escape networks in occupied Europe. At the outbreak of war, however, he was working as a shipping clerk in Brussels. He decided to flee to France, but on the road to Paris, he witnessed a Luftwaffe attack on a group of refugees.
The columns of refugees got strafed by the Stukas. It was the first time that I saw what war was like against civilians, dead, children, old people. And that had such an impact on me that I decided that in the future I would fight steel with steel.
Posing as an American citizen and driving a Chevrolet with New York number plates, Guido escaped to England via Spain. He then volunteered for the recently formed Allied 10th Commando. His first mission was a raid on the occupied Channel Island of Sark.
Having landed and climbed the cliff, we heard the German soldiers who were shouting and so on. And suddenly, a ray of light, the door opens. We think, how possible that they have spotted us? They did not spot it. There was one soldier who went out, and we guessed that he was just relieving himself. We looked at one another, and that crazy idea came up in our minds. We'll get him with his pants down. And we got him with his pants down. Me from the back. So we had taken one prisoner of war who turned out to be very good.
His exploits were rewarded with a one-week pass to London. There he was hand-picked by the newly formed Sabotage and Espionage Unit, the Special Operations Executive. To prove himself, he was given 12 days to entrap a female traitor who was involved in smuggling deserters from Liverpool to Neutral Ireland.
Fiona was the most lovely, good-looking girl, dark-haired, with green eyes.
By posing as a would-be deserter, he gained the young woman's confidence.
We went to a dance hall where we had a good dance. She asked me if I would like to come and have a cup of tea. Of course, the tea was very good. But what happened later was much better. Now here, the pillow is a very good thing to get confidence. Today, I'm still ashamed of having used that method. But at war, any method is possible.
How did you feel about blurring the lines between your job and your private life?
But there was not any difference. The private life was the job.
Even to the extent of moving in with a woman?
Yes. Yes.
And you
You have to become a very cold fish, you know.
On Guido's orders, Fiona was arrested.
At the police station, I saw the girl. She spit on me, and she was right to do it.
How did you feel when she spat on you?
Like a heel.
Did you regret
No.
what you'd done?
No, no.
Following this baptism into espionage work, the SOE gave Guido a major project, the setting up of a top-secret pan-European escape network, and a new name, Pierre Lalande. 2 weeks later, Guido and his radio operator were parachuted into occupied France, landing 40 kilometers from their final destination of Paris. Warned by headquarters against traveling by train, as there were frequent security checks, they decided to hitchhike.
We stood at 6 o'clock in the morning, just standing out of the way, of course. Saw a car arriving. I went in the middle of the road.
As the vehicle slowed, Guido was stunned to find he had stopped 2 armed German soldiers.
I felt if I can get away with other people, I can get away with German soldiers.
Wasn't there part of you that wanted to run back into the forest?
That would have been dangerous. That would have been very dangerous.
The 2 agents clambered aboard and set off for Paris with the unsuspecting Germans helping them along their way.
I spoke to them about how lovely Germany was, how well I knew Munich, and they even gave us a bar of chocolate.
So you decided to be a German lover?
Yes. You see, you need, of course you need luck. But sometimes, well, you need to dare to do the unexpected thing.
In just 2 months, Guido had established escape routes running from the Dutch-German border to the Pyrenees. Called the Pierre-Jacques Line, he had personally recruited over 200 agents. Constantly travelling, Guido adopted dozens of false identities to cover his movements across occupied France. A major part of his work involved smuggling large amounts of currency to pay his agents and bribe officials. Yet every journey increased his risk of capture. One day, when Guido caught the Paris to Lyon train carrying 5.5 million francs hidden in a suitcase, 2 German corporals got into his carriage, intent on causing trouble.
I allowed them once to push my hat, twice to push my hat. And with the 3rd time, they did the same thing. I turned to them, and in German, I bawled them out. Achter Hans, come here. Don't you know? Have you ever heard of a Frenchman working for the Great Reich? And the fact that I barked at them, well, was sufficient to get them very small.
With the suitcase stuffed full of money at his side, Guido had to get rid of the 2 soldiers as quickly as possible.
And I was there with 5.5 million, because that was the danger. Right? Explain 5.5 million.
Desperate, Guido risked everything on his next move. He threatened them with arrest unless they got off the train at the next station.
Oh, they were white. They were white. Huh? And with a beautiful Heil Hitler, where I also did Heil Hitler. Huh?
Guido's bluff had worked, and the soldiers, believing him to be a Gestapo officer, immediately obeyed his orders.
I went to the end of the line, bolted into a cafe, and took 2 cognac, the one after the other. And then went back the other way in order to deliver.
By early 1944, Guido's network had helped hundreds of people to escape to Britain, including downed airmen and agents on the run. However, the network's success had begun to attract the attention of the Nazi security forces, which had already infiltrated one Parisian resistance group.
What London did not know was that the whole organization had been beheaded and replaced by stooges who were German agents.
Not realizing the other network had been betrayed, Guido chose a bad time to break one of his own security rules. He took the place of a SIG agent at a Paris meeting set up by London.
When I went up to the barmaid to whom I gave the password tried to warn me. And indeed, near both the exits of the place, there were men who unmistakably were German police. Those people, you could always recognize them. You smelt them. So, as from that moment, being aware of the whole thing, I already started building up my first offense.
The Germans believed Guido was an important SOE agent. He was arrested and taken to Avenue Foch in Paris for interrogation by the Abwehr. Assuming one of his many aliases, Guido told them his name was André Bérard and that he was just a small-time black marketeer. He put his real identity to the very back of his mind.
I was André Bérard. I was nobody else.
How can you put yourself into that frame of mind, though?
Well, that is just a mental exercise.
Guido knew that if the Germans broke his story, he wouldn't leave Paris alive. Despite 3 months of brutal interrogation, the Germans failed to uncover Guido's true identity as the head of one of Europe's biggest escape organizations. Convinced he was a small-time crook, the Germans deported him. Together with French captors of the Nazis, Guido began the killing 15-day journey by cattle truck to eastern Germany. Also destined for the labor camps was resistance member Pierre Rossin.
We were 110 detainees per coach, and there was no air. Everything was completely closed in. We were pressed against each other. There was no air, none at all. It was an absolutely hellish feeling to be in these coaches and to be unable to move.
Every day, the toll, the death toll per wagon was at least of a 20.
And people would scream or would call out to their mothers, "This is the end. We're all going to die."
The heat was worse than the cold. Well, we happened not to receive water during 9 days. Well, you can imagine how thick our tongues were, how we licked the inside of the carriages in the hope of finding some moisture.
Guido's worst fears were realized when the survivors arrived at their destination, the infamous slave labor camp, Dora.
We were aware of what was our destiny. We did not know that in the span of 28 months of its existence, Dora cost more than 23,000 lives. We knew it was hell, but we didn't know yet to what extent it was hell.
Dora was run by SS Obersturmführer Hans-Karl Moser. For newly arrived prisoners, its appearance was deceptive.
It was like a town. There was a mayor, who was the head of the camp, police, local councillors, and heads of the barracks, and theatres. There was even a brothel.
However, Dora was a death camp, and like the other camps, its gates were adorned with a chilling slogan.
Arbeit macht frei. Work makes a man free. Through the chimney of the crematorium.
In the hills behind the town lay a labyrinth of tunnels in which the Nazis hid a secret V-2 rocket factory. Hitler's top rocket scientist, Werner von Braun, had designed Germany's most advanced weapon of mass destruction. With the success of the V-1 flying bomb blitz, Hitler planned to rain the unstoppable V-2 missiles on Britain and bring the country to its knees. However, the slave laborers constantly sabotaged the production lines, sometimes with devastating effect. Pierre Rosin and Guido were lucky. Neither had to work more than a few days in the factory tunnels. Internal resistance contacts at the camp got them jobs in the clothes store. Yet even here, Guido was to prove a thorn in the Germans' side. With the appalling death rate at Dora, the POW's belongings turned into a mountain of loot which the Germans insisted had to be catalogued.
All the clothes followed from prison to concentration camp were hung, labeled, and so on and so on. The same for everything which was jewels, rings, and so on.
Guido exploited the situation by persuading his boss, Uli, that a second catalogue system would increase the store's efficiency.
And he allowed us to make a second card system. And when the order came to burn everything, card system, there was one card system which was burned and the other one which was hidden, and parts of which have been found back in Poland. There is a full record concerning 3 months of Dora's existence.
Guido's records were invaluable in documenting the full details of the atrocities committed by the Nazis. The information later formed part of war crimes investigations. By late 1944, the Allies were advancing on all fronts, and like many Germans, Guido's boss Uli realized that defeat was inevitable.
That very morning, we saw him going into his office, sit down, and he was writing a letter. And suddenly we heard a shot. He had killed himself. He had written a last letter to his granddaughter, in which he said, "You know, I made a great mistake. I never was truly a Nazi, but circumstances and weakness led me to Nazism." He was not an evil man, though I am convinced that he would have sent us to the gallows as easily as that. But we felt very, very sorry for him. You may be as deep into misery. There's always a human angle somewhere. There's always a small flower which blooms and which show that in life everything is not necessary darkness.
Weeks later, Dora was heavily bombed and V-2 production finally abandoned. The SS fled westwards, using the prisoners to transport their loot.
We loaded the carts, and the detainees pulled the carts across the mountains. We had to push them, and we had to pull them.
On which were stacked all the loot, because I say loot, which had been gathered by the SS.
All the people, detainees, who were unable to follow were all shot.
Most of those who had to pull, well, got crushed when a wagon, gathering speed, just ran over them.
It was like a nightmare, on the way I wanted to escape. I could have escaped at that time, but we were so weary, so tired that we couldn't manage it at all.
But Guido had a plan. He had stolen the distinctive uniform of a German common law criminal and passed himself off as a group leader. To avoid suspicion, he began to beat his fellow prisoners.
Los, los, huh? Just on their heads and...
So you were hitting your friends?
Yes, huh? On purpose.
Having organized a diversion, the group were able to slip away from the column of prisoners.
9 of us went off in the bushes. 2 at the last moment didn't dare to risk it.
Under Guido's leadership, the group crossed the Elbe and met the advancing Americans. It was only then that he revealed his true identity to his colleagues. Pierre Rosin, for one, was shocked to discover that he was not André Bérard, but an important resistance leader called Guido Zemschrev.
I thought he was André Bérard. He told me that he was captured, and we were part of the internal camp resistance together. And none of us knew that he belonged to an undercover English organization. I had no idea he wasn't even French.
Guido returned to London to a personal thank you from Winston Churchill. He went on to receive military honours from the French, Dutch and British governments. As a result of his SOE activities, Guido had helped over 300 Allied fighters return safely to Britain.
The moment I will leave this world, I will leave happy, with the feeling of having achieved something in my life.